Right. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So there are actually multiple ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and we have many examples from the Quran and the Hadith that uses this literary device of a parable. And not all of them, well, we're definitely not going to cover all of them because there are tens of dozens of them. But I picked these 5 for today's discussion or for today's halaqah, inshallah, because they are all pertaining to the parable of a believer. So whenever you see any of these 5 ahadith, you will know that the Prophet ﷺ is talking about he's giving an example of how the believer should be, or how they should behave, or how they should speak, or how they should carry themselves in dealing with other people. So more often than not, we hear of parables more in the Bible, and that's because that was, according to biblical scholars, that's what they call a literary device or a method of how Prophet Isa ﷺ used to speak. Now, we don't want to go into the whole spiel on did Prophet Isa ﷺ give all those examples or not, but just to keep it really simple, the parables that you find in the Bible are actually somewhat hard. They're somewhat difficult to understand. And there are some reasons as to why Prophet Isa, if he was confirmed to have used those parables in the Bible, is because, number one, he was living in a hostile environment where it wasn't feasible, if you wanted to say, to speak very, very clearly and very, very forthright and very, very direct to people. So as a result, he would speak in parables and in this kind of a style. Therefore, those who were around him would understand him very well. And those who didn't listen to him and who didn't believe in him at that time, they would listen to it and they would just be, huh? What is that? Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because when you look in the Quran and you look in the Hadith of Rasulullah, we also find many, many parables. However, you could say from a cursory examination of these parables, they're actually quite easy to grasp. And the reason being is that the Prophet ﷺ, when he spoke, yes, he was given a type of speech that was very, very comprehensive, known as Jawami al-Kalim. So he would use a few words, and those few words would be able to convey a great deal of meaning. But more specifically, when the Prophet ﷺ gave these examples, they were actually meant for people to understand. It wasn't like a code or something for people like during the time of Isa alayhi, where it was only for those who believed that they would understand, and those who didn't believe, they were kind of left on the margins. Okay, so we have the Arabic the term mathal, and the plural of that is amthal, and it's literally a figure of speech. It's a literary device. So whenever we look in the Quran and the Sunnah, we find that a parable, a simile, and a metaphor, these are all used, they all fall under the bucket, you could say, as parables. Now, of course, in balagha, in Arabic language, they do differentiate all of these things. So you have just regular darb al-mathal, darb al-amthal, you have like an example, an analogy, and then you also have, like, for example, this idea of the metaphor and a simile. So if you say, for example, Muhammad kal asad, Muhammad is like something, right? He's like a lion. Or you could say Muhammad is a lion. Now, obviously, no one's going to be dense and say Are you saying he identifies as a lion? No. It just means that there are people who identify as cats. I've seen that. Okay? Like meowing. Go to the shelter. Okay? Inshallah, humane society, no kill shelter. Okay? So how do you differentiate between all of these things? Right? How do you differentiate between and by the way, this picture that I grabbed is from the internet, so don't be like, what is this? Okay? So when you have an analogy, it's basically you have a method, is basically you're saying something is like the example of such and such thing. So you are taking an example and there's perhaps some sort of characteristic in it that you are using in order to compare it to the object that you are using in your example, right? So that would be a method. Now, if you have a metaphor, my sister is the devil. Right? My sister is the devil, right? Now, now obviously, you know, even in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes certain human beings, and he says, min al-jinnati wal-nas, right? And the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described certain evildoers, that yes, they are of the human species, but their behavior is more like the shayateen, right? So here, it's just actually saying that the sister here on the screen, okay? Just in case someone splices that from the video and then takes it. On the screen here, it says, my sister is the devil, okay? And then here we have on the side here, a simile, which is now you are simply comparing an object to something else, okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses al-amthal in the Quran a lot, and he even talks about it as a form. وَلَقَدْ صَرَّفْنَا فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ لِلنَّاسِ مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرَ شَيْءٍ جَدَلًا. And so here, I'm not going to read it to you because you're adults. Okay? So that's one of my things I don't like to read off of myself. So basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put many different varieties in the Quran for all kinds of people, and he has made the amthal, the parables and examples for them. And then, but look what it says in ayah, but people, they like to argue. So you have an example that is very, very clear, but instead of learning from what the example teaches, people would prefer to argue. Okay? Do I have to move closer because it's not, the receiver is not catching? Okay. All right. Allah, thank you. And Allah says in the Quran, وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ وَمَا يَعْقِلُهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using this literary device of parables as what? So that people can understand. And only those who have knowledge can understand. Also, in Surah Al-Hashr, وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. And these examples, these parables, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed forward for them to think about. Okay? So let's jump right into the first parable that the Prophet ﷺ tells us about. And here, the Prophet ﷺ, on the authority of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu ta'ala anhu, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, قال مثل المؤمن الذي يقرأ القرآن مثل الأترجة ريحها طيب وطعمها طيب ومثل المؤمن الذي لا يقرأ القرآن مثل التمرة لا ريح لها وطعمها حلو ومثل المنافق الذي يقرأ القرآن مثل الريحانة ريحها طيب وطعمها مر ومثل المنافق الذي لا يقرأ القرآن كمثل الحنظلة ليس لها ريح وطعمها مر. So I split the hadith into two. So here on this first slide, the Prophet ﷺ is talking about the example of the believer and their relationship with the Quran. So if the person is someone who regularly reads the Quran, recites the Quran, memorizes the Quran, even if they are struggling with it, reading through the translation, having that relationship with the Quran. It's not like something where some of our cultures tell us, oh, read the Quran cover to cover when you're like 10 years old, have a nice little party for you and go along your way, right? And then the Quran stays more as a permanent fixture on the shelf. And what did the Prophet ﷺ describe that person as? Kal utrujja, like a al-utrujja is very difficult to translate. So in the dictionaries they'll say it's a citron, okay? And well, we have the picture, don't you worry. So it's like a citron, and so you have to understand all of the citrus fruits that we see at HEB or Whole Foods or whatever, Fiesta. They are, all the fruits out there in the world, majority of them are, how should I say it? They are cultivars and hybrids based on human intervention. So, bananas that you see in the store don't actually look like the real bananas that grow outside. Okay? Apples that you see in the store, they don't actually look like the apples that grow on trees because we have selectively cultivated them in a way. Hybrid, crossbreed. But so what exactly is the utrujja? So the utrujja is, you could say, it's kind of like a lemon. Sometimes, so some people will say, well, why is it that the Prophet ﷺ is saying that the one who recites the Quran is like an utrujja? It tastes good and has a pleasant taste. Well, see, that's where you have to understand a little bit about the utrujja. So the utrujja, obviously, it looks like this gnarly looking lemon, okay? But what happens is there is you could say like the rind that precedes the actual fruit, okay? Like that white stuff that has all like the nutrients and the whatever that stuff is called, okay? That actually, some varieties of them, it's actually sweet, okay? But the actual fruit inside is actually, some of them can be neutral, some of them can be very, very sour. So that kind of a sweet and a sour taste is actually quite refreshing. So here the Prophet ﷺ is describing the believer who reads the Quran as this fruit. Why? Because it smells good and it tastes good. So when you think about this fruit, even if you just kept it to oranges and lemons, right? You get so much benefit from the peel, from the oil, from the zest, from the seeds. And then you get so much benefit also just from the taste in and of itself. So here the Prophet ﷺ is saying that the person who reads the Quran, the effects of that Quran are visible at least in two ways. In both the taste as well as in its fragrance. But the person who doesn't read the Quran but is still a believer, the Prophet ﷺ described them as a date. So the date fruit is sweet, but there is no specific fragrance to it. So you want to kind of think about where you are on that scale. Do you want to be zesty? Halal, okay? Keeping it halal. Do you want to be zesty and fresh? Or do you want to be like a nice date? Alhamdulillah. Okay? And look at the munafiq. The Prophet ﷺ says the munafiq who reads the Quran, may Allah protect all of us. The munafiq, the hypocrite, the one who reads the Quran, he has all the hallmarks of fragrance. And the Prophet ﷺ says it's rayhana, basil. Okay? The Prophet ﷺ did not specify what kind of basil, Italian basil, Thai basil, doesn't matter. All kinds of basil, it's very, very strong flavor. But the taste is not always as amazing. But you're eating it for the smell, for the aroma. So the Prophet ﷺ is trying to explain that this basil plant is very deceptive because it gives you the impression that it's very, very fragrant, but when you actually bite into it, it has a bitter taste. And therefore, that in and of itself is the example of the hypocrite. Not sweet on the inside. The bitterness of disbelief, the bitterness of hypocrisy, the bitterness of duality and two-facedness, the bitterness of focusing on the facade and the external when there is nothing that is in the internal that backs it up. And so we as believers, we are to be internal as well as external. And then you have the hypocrite who does not even read the Quran, and he is like a hamdala. So hamdala is basically a type of it's kind of like a plant that tastes bitter and it has like no smell, and you'll see the picture. Okay, right? So that down there is basically a hamdala in the bottom right corner. Please do not mistake that for a watermelon. Okay, so let's take an analysis of what we have here. So if you look at the Quran, if you look at the believer, the one who reads the Quran, the expectation for them to have that kind of, as I like to call it, to be zesty, right, is that they read, they ponder, they reflect, and they implement. So their behavior and their words and their actions, it is all reflective of that Quran. And if you look at the one who, the believer who does not read the Quran, the reason why he is sweet or she is sweet is because at least they implement the Quran. So I don't want you to think that, we're all believers, so we are at least a date. As long as you implement it, then you fall into the category of the tamra, the date. Because if you're implementing it, that means your spiritual foundation is that of implementation and following the way of the Prophet ﷺ. So although it might not have, there's no smell, yes, you could say dates have a slight smell, but it's not very strong compared to, a lemon or citron, but it tastes sweet. And if you look at the munafiq, look at the way how the Prophet said, he said that it's like the basil. Why? Because it's only on the tongue. It's of the aroma from the mouth. So that's why the hypocrite, they only pay lip service. And so it smells good, but that's it. It's very deceptive. And the munafiq that does not read the Quran, as you can see here, so there's no smell and it actually tastes bitter. So I'll just let you look at that for your own benefit before we move on to the next one. Okay, so think of the types of neglect that the munafiq is undertaking, right? So the munafiq has neglected the Quran, firstly, by not believing in it. Not believing in the Quran, not believing in its teachings. The munafiq has also failed in the interaction with the Quran by failing to read it, failing to listen to it, failing to memorize it. And the munafiq, the hypocrite, has also failed in cognition aspect, thinking about it, pondering over it, and finally, to live out the Quran. So if the inverse of this is that if you want to be like the believer who has of a good taste and of a good fragrance, then you need to flip it, and that is you are to believe in it, read, listen, memorize, think over it, ponder over it, and live out the Quran. So here is a summary. So the morals and lessons of what does this hadith teach us on this specific example is the neglect of the Quran, inward versus outward implementation, and faith versus hypocrisy. Okay. Now, the next parable that the Prophet ﷺ has here is عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مثل المؤمن كمثل الزرع لا تزال الريح تميله ولا يزال المؤمن يصيبه البلاء ومثل المنافق كمثل شجرة الأرز لا تهتزوا حتى تستحصل. So here the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the way of the believer, now in the previous parable, we're talking about the believer and the interaction of the Quran. So now in this parable, the Prophet ﷺ is talking about how does the believer and the hypocrite, how do they interact with the trials and the tests that come around them. So the Prophet ﷺ says the believer is like a young plant. It's a very young, and in some hadith it says khamat min az-zar. It's like a young plant, a young bud, you could say, a shoot of a plant. So it's very, very soft. And in some other hadith, for example, in Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ says, sumbula. It's like you can think of like a wheat stalk. It has all the seeds inside. But I want you to pay attention to what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. It says that all the trials and tribulations that come to this believer, what happens? This plant will bend with it. So think of your life. Are you as they say, rolling with the punches? Are you taking it all in, being patient? Like the Prophet ﷺ says that the affairs of the believer, it's all good, right? If something good happens to them, they are thankful, and if something bad happens to them, they are patient. So you look at the people of Gaza. Despite facing impending doom and death every single day, every single second of their existence, and you have you have the Zionists that are trying to completely obliterate them out. And you cannot help but think about the people of Gaza and other people who are being, facing oppression, whether in Sudan or Syria, wherever, right? Look at their patience, look at their perseverance. They are indeed like these young plants. The world might be trying to getting rid of all of them, but they are coming up fast. And they are dealing with this situation in the best that they can. You look at the example here that the Prophet ﷺ talks about the munafiq. What does the Prophet ﷺ say? The munafiq is like the cedar tree. Now, I don't want anyone from Lebanon to get upset, okay? Because there are many varieties of cedar trees. So it's not picking on that variety, but it's to give you an example of why the Prophet ﷺ gave an example of the munafiq and that tree. Why? It's because the cedar tree is extremely tall, it has a huge trunk, and it's quite formidable. But that is the example of the hypocrite, and that is those huge trees, they don't bend and they don't sway to the wind and to the trials and the tribulation. The hypocrite does not bend with the tribulations because they're so focused on the external, about looking good, looking strong, looking presentable all the time. They haven't even focused on dealing with the different lessons and the different things that Allah is going to test them with. So when the wind and the trials and the tribulations come, what does that tree, what happens to that tree? It breaks and falls over. So when the wind comes and the storm comes, that test from Allah comes, that hypocrite just collapses over. And we see a lot of that in our society today, where we call that in our world, first world problems. People having a meltdown over the fact that their internet is not working. Or they're having a meltdown that their food order was a little slow. They're having a meltdown for whatever it is that they're having a meltdown for. And if you have seen those individuals, may Allah help all of them and all of us, where something happens to them, and all of a sudden, like just look at I call it, you have like intelligence, emotional intelligence, and you also have the spiritual intelligence, the spiritual immaturity. Why does Allah hate me? And you'll hear non-Muslims saying, why does God want to blank with me? Have you heard of that before? They will say such blasphemous things. Why is Allah trying to, do this and this? Why does Allah have to do this to me? Why does Allah have to do that to me? It's completely out of line and unacceptable. And that is because they have one little test that comes their way, boom, collapse. Okay? So the lesson to be learned is, so there you go. Okay, as promised. So think about this image right here. This plant that has to, the wind comes, yes, it might fall, but over time it will bounce back. It will be stronger. And you have on the right side an image of this massive tree. It looks quite majestic, but can it handle a strong wind? No. So here you have the analysis here. So like the believer is like the young plant. So when the Prophet says in the other narration of sumbula, it has multiple seeds inside. It's like a wheat germ. You have all these seeds in this stalk. In other words, you are consistently going to be giving more and more benefit. You are leaving behind a legacy. So it bends and it straightens. So it goes with the wind. So you are weak individually, but together you are strong and you can handle the different tests that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes. And as for the munafiq, it collapses in hardship. So think about that. Next time when something doesn't work your way, take a deep breath. Take into consideration what people are undergoing around the world before you have a fit. So here are some lessons and morals and lessons for you all. So yes, of course, life can be difficult, but the reward for your patience is there. And when you are collectively, you are all together, working together. Yes, one young plant stalk might appear weak, but together it is strong. And by the way, if you're interested, look into go do some reading on like how grasslands and like plants and certain trees, they actually prevent, because they're all together, they actually prevent erosion and mudslides, right? Because they're all together supporting one another. But if by itself, it's not going to do anything. And leaving a legacy behind and versus the true weakness. So looking strong on the outside doesn't necessarily mean you can handle trials and tribulations. Now, the next parable that the Prophet ﷺ has for us is actually part of a much longer, it's a slightly longer hadith. I'm not going to include that because that's not part of today's scope, but I'll give you a quick summary of it. So the Prophet ﷺ is talking about there will come a time where there'll be a lot of trials and tribulations. Those who are trustworthy are called liars, and people belie them. And those who are untrustworthy are viewed as the source of information. And we see that today, right now. People parading all kinds of trash information, and everyone's like, well, we don't know. Maybe the earth is flat, right? And they're like, but you can't prove it's not flat. Keep walking. So keeping that in mind about there's a time of lots of fitna and a lot of struggles, what does the Prophet ﷺ talk about? He's now talking about your internal value. And he says in a hadith, he says, وَالَّذِي نَفْسُ مُحَمَّدٍ بِيَدِهِ إِنَّ مَثَلَ الْمُؤْمِنِ لَكَمَثَلِ الْقِطْعَةِ مِنَ الذَّهَبِ نَفَخَ عَلَيْهَا صَاحِبُهَا فَلَمْ تَغَيَّرْ وَلَمْ تَنْقُصْ. Wow. The example of the believer is like that of a piece of gold. no matter how the owner of this piece of gold treats it, whether he blows on it or whatever happens, it doesn't go bad. It's not devalued in any way. So why is the Prophet ﷺ giving that example? Because if you look at the properties of gold, it's very much to be desired. First and foremost, gold is one of those metals that's extremely malleable. And malleable is the term that you use to flatten something. And gold is also, you can beat it and shape it into thin wires. Gold is extremely soft. So the sisters will know that. Okay? I don't expect you guys to know. Okay? So if you have, like, for example, 24 karat gold, you will know that 24 karat gold is very soft. You can bend it. In fact, if you bend it too much, it'll just break in your hands. So you don't usually get 24 karat gold because it breaks. So what you do is you get like 18 karat, etc. So you mix it with some other metal to make it strong. So think about all of these characters that we have here. Malleable, soft, yet it is heavy in weight, in density. It's very, very heavy, and it is resistant to all these things that we have here on the screen. And I want you to apply all of these characteristics, because I'm not going to sit here and explain it, all of them to you. I want you to think about how these characteristics can apply to the believer. Are you malleable to the truth? Are you also soft and gentle in your behavior, but yet of great value, like gold? So think about it. If you were to take a piece of gold right now and throw it in the trash, does that gold lose its value? No. If you were to step on it, does it lose its value? If you were to break it and crush it into a million pieces, does that gold lose value? No. So find intrinsic worth and value in your iman. Find intrinsic value in yourself, not through the external stuff that you see on social media. That if they get this or they have this kind of lifestyle, that makes them successful. So if you look at gold, gold endures. Gold never loses value, right? So, and I want you to also think about the context of where this hadith is located. It's within the context of times of trials and tribulations. So if you were to take a piece of gold and stick it into the fire, the piece of gold becomes brighter and brighter, and the impurities go away. So when you go through tribulations and trials in life, the impurities leave your body as well. Okay? So the morals and lessons for this parable is, you as a believer, you need to understand that you have great value within yourself as a believer. And to kind of give you context of that, the Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic narration that the value of a believer in the eyes of Allah is more than the Kaaba. This is an authentic narration. The value of the believer is more than the Kaaba itself. So even if you cannot wrap your head around the idea of, we are gold, okay? That's great. But if you cannot wrap your head around it, wrap your head around this idea that you have value. Your iman gives you intrinsic value. Also, going through difficulties and trials and tribulations will make you stronger, and value comes within, not from outside. Now, finally, in the final hadith we have here, in that same hadith, the Prophet ﷺ continues with another parable, and he says, وَالَّذِي نَفْسُ مُحَمَّدٍ بِيَدِهِ إِنَّ مَثَلَ الْمُؤْمِنِ لَكَمَثَلِ النَّحْلَةِ. Okay? The parable of the example of the believer is like that of the honeybee. And the Prophet ﷺ says, it only eats what is pure, and it doesn't spoil things where it lands. It doesn't break things. And I want you to think about what examples we have of that. It doesn't eat except what is good. Bees are not like flies. They don't go around the filthy stuff. They only go to the best of flowers. And so think about that as, why is the believer like that? because the believer only eats what is halal, what is good. Halalan tayyiba. وَوَضَعَ طَيِّبًا. When it says lay, it means it doesn't give off anything except the good. So the byproduct of honey is what? Bees is honey. And honey is the only byproduct of an insect that we as humans consume. Can you think of any other byproduct of an insect that we consume? It's the only insect that has a byproduct that we consume. It is the only organic byproduct out there that can stay for thousands of years as long as it is sealed and nothing contaminates it. Honey can stay for thousands of years. Okay? You want the proof of that? Go ask Fir'aun. Okay? Because they have discovered honey from like 4,000 years ago in their tombs. And it doesn't break. So look how formidable the honeybee is. Even though it has a stinger and people don't like to be stung, obviously, but when it lands on the flower, it doesn't mess it up. It doesn't mess it up. In fact, the honeybee gives back to the flower what it takes. So the flower attracts it with the nectar, but it is waiting for the honey to give something back, and that is the pollen. So you as a believer, are you simply consuming resources and not giving back? Or are you someone that takes and gives, right? And it does not ruin. So all honeybees, they are beneficial to the world. So we have here, and of course, if you look into other examples of honeybee, for example, in studies, they have found that, for example, bees are actually highly social creatures. So if they find a resource, okay, they will scout out the resource and they will calculate how much this resource is. And by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the honeybee will figure out how much it would harvest from this bush or garden so that it doesn't deplete the resources over time too fast. Look how smart the honeybee is. The honeybee is not stingy. It finds a source, it shares it. It's not an information hog. It's not a gatekeeper. It doesn't say, oh, well, I found it for me. No. Everything that a honey does is for the betterment of the entire colony, the entire hive. And we as believers, are we of those people who find something that is beneficial and then we share it with others? Or are we keeping it to ourselves? And if you work in corporate, you will understand that you have the small mindset and you have the big mindset. The small mindset person is the one that says, oh, if I share with my coworkers how to do this or how to do that, whatever is a software or some sort of knowledge that you have for that. A lot of people have a very different mindset. They think, oh, that's going to make me expendable. No, it doesn't. It doesn't make you expendable. It actually makes you more of a resource. Sharing that knowledge never makes you expendable. In fact, unless you're going to get laid off and you have to do a knowledge transfer, okay? You got to do a KT. But in general, sharing knowledge with your coworkers of something of how to do a process, no one ever says, oh, you shared with your coworker? Thank you very much. Goodbye. They're like, oh, we are collaborative. That's always a good characteristic. Think about the honeybee and the fact that it doesn't just haphazardly sting anyone. It only stings as the last line of defense. As a believer, we are not violent, when someone just does something to us. It is only when we have to defend ourselves and we have to stand up for the truth, for the protection of the greater society, then we have to use stronger consequences. Okay? So that one I had misnumbered, so it's parable number 4. Now, finally, here the Prophet ﷺ, and this is a long hadith, but I will try to keep it short. So during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a group of companions, and there's different narrations. There was this man who brought a jumar al-nakhl. They brought a palm heart. So a palm heart is basically the inside of a young palm tree, and it's white, and you can eat it. So it's kind of a little bit more fibrous than artichoke. If you eat like bamboo shoots, it's kind of like that, but it's very tasty, it's very juicy, it's with young date palms. So someone brought a palm heart to the Prophet and put it in front of him, and then the Prophet started asking his companions, who here knows that the parable of the believer of a type of tree? And all the companions started thinking about all the trees out there, what kind of tree, they all started guessing. And Abdullah ibn Umar said he knew, he kind of had an inkling in his heart that it was the date palm. But out of respect for the other Sahaba who were older and wiser, he didn't speak up. And then the Prophet ﷺ later on said that it is the date palm. The believer is like a date palm. Later on, Umar ibn Khattab, his dad, found out that his son Abdullah ibn Umar knew. So Umar was asking, so why didn't you speak up? And obviously, Abdullah ibn Umar, out of respect for the Sahaba, he did not speak up. So what is it about the date palm that we can benefit from as a believer? So number one is, date palms are strong trees. And they're not like cedar trees where wind comes and it falls over. And I just realized something. In the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, I think it was either Qawm 'Ad or Thamud, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed them. After that horrible tornado storm, what did Allah describe the date palms as? كأنهم أعجاز نخل خاوية. And so date trees, date palm trees, they're actually very strong. So if a storm comes around, it might lose all its leaves, but the trunk remains. So the trunk of this tree is very sturdy. You cannot shake it. It's very strong. So when Allah tells Maryam to shake the tree, it was metaphorical. Allah is not expecting Maryam, who just gave birth, to go and shake the date palm tree. Absolutely not. But it was more of put your hand on it and symbolically push against it, and that's it. The dates would fall. So what is that example? What is that like for the believer? You as a believer, your iman, your belief, your entire existence should be strong like that date palm tree, like the trunk. The roots of this date palm tree is your iman. It's your values. It's your beliefs. What are your roots? What are your values? You look at currently right now, all this stuff that is going on in the world. We see very clearly that there is a thirst from non-Muslims for Islam. You see it. They're looking for it. But they just kind of have to get over themselves and their racism. Because they're like, well, Islam has this, we like that. Islam has that, we like that. But I still like my bacon. Like, you need to get over that. Okay? Get over the khanzir. So, the believer is principled. The believer is upright, straight like the tree trunk, not distracted. And if you look at the roots, we talked about it, as we see in the Quran as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives an example of La ilaha illallah as that of a tree. And so what are your values? Where are you pulling your values from? Is it based on your culture alone, or is it based on your beliefs, based on what the Prophet ﷺ taught us? Also, if you look at the leaves of the date palm is one of those very few trees that lives in the desert and stays green, evergreen the entire year round. You might say, no, but I have seen brown date, whatever they're called, leaves and stalks. We've seen that, yeah, because it's been cut down. But if it's on the tree, it always stays green. And that is like the way of the believer. The believer is not seasonal. You are always, mashallah, as the young generation call it, locked in, dialed in. Okay. Hey, it's still better than skipping, okay? So, evergreen. So we're not, as you'll hear scholars saying things like, don't be like a Muslim only for the Ramadan. Be a Muslim throughout the whole year. And so you are to be evergreen like the leaves of the date palm tree. The date fruit, look at it. It lives in the harshest of climates, and yet it gives you such a densely packed, nutritious fruit. And I want you to also think of the image. You know, if someone comes up to a date palm tree and wants to get some dates, you know, they're not a proper date farmer. You know, they might throw something at it, and yet someone throws a rock at it, and what comes out? Something nice. When someone comes and harms you, what's the response? Right? Is the response something that is good? Idfa' billati hi ahsan, to respond back with something that is better. I saw this really funny clip of this Khalid, this Lebanese Khalid. For those who speak Arabic, you understand. For those who don't understand, take it as an incentive to learn Arabic. So she was basically saying, she was being sarcastic, okay? She was saying, for those of you Arabic, you'll like it. She was saying, إذا رماك أحد بكلام جارح. If someone throws at you, says some, horrible words at you, فرميه بالورود. Throw flowers at them back. مع المزهرية كمان والطاولة كمان. So she said, well, if someone was to throw at you some rude words, throw roses and flowers back at them, along with the vase and the table. No, we will not throw the vase and the table back at them. Okay? And I'm not going to go into all the benefits of dates and ajwa. That's for another speaker, inshallah. Okay? The palm heart, Jummar al-Nakhl, that we talked about, that's what's inside the date palm. That's something that you can eat. It's something inside. Look at the fact that it lives in the harshest of climates, yet it survives with such little amount of water. It's constantly giving. So back to the harsh climate. The fact that it can use the minimum amount of water resource and yet provide such benefits, such shade, date fruits. Every aspect of this date palm tree you can benefit from. If you were to chop off the top of the crown of the date palm, you can use the trunk as a pillar. If you were to chop off the stalks of the date palm leaves, you can use it to weave mats and baskets. You can use it to, even the Prophet ﷺ, he had a leather pillow that was stuffed with the fiber and the leaves of palm tree. Many, many different uses. Everything with this date palm you can benefit from. Also, the date pit, you might wonder, it's just a date pit, just throw it on the ground. Actually, the Bedouins, what they used to do is they used to take the date pit and they used to grind it up, and that would be used as animal feed for their goats, etc. And now you have these, I don't know if it's been appropriated, but you have these people like, you have like date pit coffee. It's like a coffee alternative. Yeah, you tell yourself that. Okay? It's not the same as caffeine. Look at the shade that the date palm gives, right? You just think about the imagery that we have. Maryam alayhi salatu salam, she was under a date palm tree, right? You have the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to give khutbah next to a date palm tree until he moved. We have so many different images of that, right? So think about the significance of the moon. And so, brothers and sisters, to kind of circle back, all of these 5 ahadith, if you were to think about them and just kind of review them on your own, you will notice that these 5 kind of give you the methodology of how you are to be as a believer. Whether it is in your faith, in your principles, in dealing with trials, in how you view yourself and self-esteem, how it is in your relationship with the Quran, how it is that you are in benefiting others. These are the examples of the Prophet ﷺ that he has given us. And these are not difficult to understand. And I invite you to think more. We didn't even cover all the different aspects of a honeybee and how that can apply to the believer. When you go home, just go look online and look up different facts about the honeybee. And look up the different things that the honeybee can do and think about what characteristics that can apply to you. All right? جزاكم الله خير سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك. جزاكم الله خير. Thank you very much. So.